Hi, my name is Sara Ross, and I'm with Undaunted K-12. We're recording this video to help school district leaders, their partners, and state agency and policymakers understand the new landscape for solar and storage projects. School district leaders must understand and successfully navigate new rules in order to be eligible for claiming tax credits for these projects. As of December 8th, we don't have guidance from the IRS on the new rules that Congress devised in the July 2025 Budget Reconciliation Law, otherwise known as the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. We know that even without the benefit of guidance, school districts need to make decisions about current or planned projects. So we're sharing with you our best thinking, and we'll continue to update our hub to reflect the latest available information. So please bookmark this page and sign up for our newsletter. So the new landscape for claiming tax credits for solar and storage projects involves a shorter period over which the credit is available and 3 new tests called prohibited foreign entity tests. This video will go into depth on each of the new prohibited foreign entity tests. It's important to note that in these slides, we assume the school district is the owner of the energy project, so the solar energy system, for example, and therefore it's the school district that's the filer for the tax credits. If schools choose to pursue a power purchase agreement, the PPA provider will be the one navigating these same rules. In other words, the rules don't change in the case of a PPA, but the context certainly does. So big picture, before the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, school districts and others had a very clear, well understood, and direct path to earning tax credits for solar energy systems, and they could do so for many years into the future. After the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, we have a now uncertain path to obtaining those same credits, and we have less time over which we can claim those credits. So let's start first with credit availability. With the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, projects must commence construction by July 4th, 2026, in order to have 4 years to be placed into service. So this buys us a lot of extra time to place projects into service if we can start by this upcoming July 4th. Projects that cannot commence construction by July 4th, 2026 must be placed into service by December 31st of 2027 to still receive a credit for a solar energy project. On the thermal and energy storage side, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act did not affect the timelines that were laid out in the Inflation Reduction Act. So we still have those original timelines. So projects must commence construction by December 31st of 2035 to be eligible for a credit. The credit will be slightly reduced for projects that start in 2034 and 2035. This was policymakers' way of phasing out the availability of a credit. So that's the credit availability side of the equation. Let's talk about the 3 new prohibited foreign entity rules affecting solar and storage projects. There are what we call 3 legs to this stool: the material assistance test, which has to do with the sourcing of project components; the entity level test, which is concerned exclusively with who is the filer for the tax credit; and the payments test and recapture, which is looking at who has control over the energy project for which a credit is being sought. It's important to understand that developers, by and large, will be very focused, maybe exclusively, on the first leg of the stool, the material assistance test. They are, of course, intimately involved in sourcing project components. This is where they have a span of control and can help de-risk projects. But filers also need to contend with the entity level test, and schools will need to engage their counsel in passing this test. And then procurement officers are also going to need an ongoing approach to compliance for the payments test, which has a recapture period going far into the future. These rules, you might also hear them referred to as FEOC, standing for the Foreign Entity of Concern. You can see a very detailed write-up from the Tax Law Center at NYU Law and a shorter summary of these rules that they've also provided, and we've linked below in these notes. So there's some new terminology to understand as we navigate these 3 new tests. First, there's an umbrella term, prohibited foreign entity, or PFE. That is comprised of 2 component parts: a specified foreign entity, which is an individual or entities from the covered nations of China, Iran, North Korea, or Russia, When we think about clean energy projects, this is basically about China. So a solar panel manufacturer organized as a company in China would be an SFE, or a specified foreign entity. The other component of a PFE is a foreign influence entity. Those are entities that have certain governance, equity, or debt relationships with those specified foreign entities we just talked about. So a solar panel manufacturer organized in India, but with over 50% of their profits interests being owned by Chinese nationals, that would be a foreign influenced entity. We'll have to track these key terms of art as we navigate the three tests. So let's dive in. The first one, the material assistance test. As we said, this is really about who manufactured our project components. And the goal here of this test is to eliminate credits for projects where there's a certain threshold amount, over a threshold of project components coming from those prohibited foreign entities. Again, that's the umbrella term. The effective date for this new test is any projects that start construction on or after January 1st of 2026. And this is why your developers may be pushing you to get started before the end of the year. Important notes here, we don't really understand, because again, we don't have guidance from Treasury yet, on how deep into the supply chain this analysis needs to go. We also don't know, because we don't know what constitutes compliant supply, it's quite hard to judge whether we have adequate supply of compliant materials for the size of the market that we have in the US. And if there is a constraint on supply, what price will those holders of compliant supply be able to charge? That will certainly affect our solar economics. It's important to note that this regime is different from the domestic content regime and different from the Build America, Buy America regime. This test is not based on where the goods are manufactured, but rather who made the goods. You can see the actual statutory text by following our links and looking at these section references that we've provided below. So let's talk about the thresholds that Congress laid out for the material assistance test. They basically laid out a rising percent of the project that needs to come from non-prohibited foreign entities through time. So each of these technologies, both solar and storage, has a rising percent that must come from these non-PFE sources, and these years are the year in which we commence construction on the project. The percentages will be calculated using the direct cost to the taxpayer. You can see more detail on this from the NYU Tax Law Center blog that we link below. But conceptually, we're basically creating a numerator, which is the total direct costs attributed to non-PFE manufactured products. And then in the denominator, we're putting all the direct costs attributed to our manufactured products. And from that, we construct this percentage that's you see in the table above. Here's a little perspective, for example, on the current supply chain for solar panels. It's dominated by China. You see here in the red, polysilicon, the most raw of materials, moving to ingots, wafers, cells, and then the final finished good that we put on our roofs or over our parking lots, modules. So what's happening here essentially is that the whole US market must now secure module supply from outside China or outside foreign influence entities, where those companies where China is involved. So our example of an Indian panel manufacturer with holdings by Chinese nationals. So this picture just gives you a sense of just how constrained supply may be. The developers that are serving schools and the municipal market may be small fish in this now highly competitive market when you think about utility scale developers or the large residential solar companies that secure a lot of the market supply of compliant material. This constrained supply chain over the time horizon where we still have a tax credit available may translate into significant price increases for those modules that are judged to be compliant. Next, we're going to move on to the second test, the entity level test. Remember, this is who is the filer. And we're showing you here the statutory text that Congress used to define a foreign influence entity. There's 4 ways in which you can become a foreign influence entity. It's that last one that has to do with debt issuances, where there's concern that schools could be considered a foreign influence entity. Remember that municipalities, including cities, counties, states, and school districts, regularly issue municipal debt. That debt is issued into a complex, opaque, dynamic, and essentially global capital market system. So that's the context we need to step into looking at this test with. So this test, again, asks the question, who is the filer? And it's going to eliminate any credits paid to prohibited foreign entities. Again, that umbrella term. It goes into effect for taxable years that start after the date the bill was signed. So for many schools that have a July 1st to June 30th tax year, that would mean that any solar or storage projects that are placed into service after June 30th of 2026 would be affected, because that's when our new tax year is going to start. We really don't know yet what debt issuances will need to be analyzed to pass this test, what owners of municipal debt. There's a whole cascade of ownership that happens as debt is issued, so we don't really understand which owners yet need to be analyzed. Again, you can look at our text references here listed below to see more of the statutory text. Market actors are seeking clarifications from the U.S. Treasury on the statutory text so that they can develop a workable compliance regime. So organizations like the Securities Industry and Financial Markets Association, Government Finance Officers Association, National Association of Bond Lawyers are all involved in working through this issue, as is the American Public Power Association, which offered a perspective here on the current text and sent a letter to Treasury on December 2nd, which you can read here, which detailed both their concerns and their offerings for a path forward on a workable entity level test for those that issue municipal debt. Let's turn now to the last leg of the stool, or the last test, the payments test and recapture. This test asks the question, who has effective control over the energy project? And the goal is to eliminate projects that have effective control by a specified foreign entity today, or those projects where through time a specified foreign entity develops what Congress considers effective control over the energy project. This test will go into effect for taxable years that start 2 years after the bill was signed on July 4th, 2025. So again, for many school districts, this will be July 1st, 2028 to June 30th of 2029. If you place systems into service during that period, the IRS will be able to look back at payments made during the previous year to analyze whether those payments in connection with contracts confer effective control to a specified foreign entity. It's important to note that any new licensing agreements with a specified foreign entity are automatically considered granting effective control. And because of this 10-year look back, so for 10 years after a system is placed into service, the IRS can analyze payments and decide that the energy project now has effective control by a specified foreign entity and recapture that tax credit. And for that reason, we're recommending to school districts that are doing any 48 capital E projects that they think about a compliance regime to navigate this payments test. We're worried about one bad payment tainting other 48 capital E projects that have been done even before this test came into effect. For more detail and to see the statutory language, you can check out these links and our section references below. Let's apply these tests to some timelines for some sample solar projects. Let's say we have a school district that's beginning construction on a solar facility on April 5th, 2025, and they're placing it into service on August 31st, 2025, within an FY 2026 taxable year that starts on July 1st, 2025, and ends on June 30th, 2026. This school district will go ahead and do their pre-filing registration sometime after their taxable year has ended, and they will have a filing deadline of November 15th, 2026. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act didn't change any of that timeline or process, so that's all still intact. Now, because this project is being placed into service before December 31st, 2027, it is eligible for a credit. And in fact, it could commence construction all the way up to July 4th, 2026, and have 4 years to place into service and still have the credit be available. That's just the credit availability lens. Now let's apply the lens of the 3 prohibited foreign entity tests. First, the material assistance test. Because this project was started before January 1st, 2026, it does not need to meet the material assistance test. Let's move on to the entity level test. So this project was placed into service on August 31st, 2025. That falls within this school district's taxable year that contains the day the bill was signed, July 4th, 2025. So this project and this filer will not need to meet the entity level test. If there was a delay in interconnecting this project and it was not interconnected until July 2nd of 2026, then this filer would need to contend with the entity level test in order to be eligible for a credit. Next and last, let's look at the payments test. So this facility, again, was started construction on April 5th, 2025. This means this project relies on Section 48, capital E. We would want the school district to look at any contracts that convey effective control to specified foreign entities related to this project, so that if they do subsequent solar projects or subsequent storage projects that also access Section 48, capital E tax credit, that look back that we talked about doesn't taint them as a filer and doesn't potentially trigger a recapture on this project that was started and placed into service much earlier than the nominal effective date of the payments test. So this is a conservative stance that we would want to convey to school districts. So let's wrap this all up, asking the question, does your school district have a path to claim credits? First, we have to make sure that the credit that we're seeking for our project is still available. For a solar project, for example, you need to commence construction by July 4th, 2026 to give yourself 4 more years to place into service, or you need to place into service by December 31st, 2027. As we discussed earlier, storage projects have a much longer time period over which the credit is available. So this factor of credit availability is unlikely to be an issue for project planning right now. That's, again, just to make sure the credit is available. Now we need to pass the 3 prohibited foreign entity tests. So first, can we pass the material assistance test with our developers helping us secure what they understand to be compliant supply of materials, or can we commence construction by December 31st, 2025? Second, we need to pass the entity level test. Can we work with our in-house counsel and maybe our bond counsel to do that and document it appropriately? If not, can we place a system into service before the end of our taxable year that contains July 4th, 2025? And then lastly, the payments test. Can we avoid contracts related to the energy properties that confer what Congress deems effective control to one of these specified foreign entities? Can we do that today? And can we continue to do that for 10 years, given the recapture feature of this test? As we've been talking about this new landscape with school districts, we've been sharing some thoughts on how to navigate this space. First, as a reminder, we're still awaiting guidance from the IRS. There are no guarantees that the IRS will issue guidance, and we don't know what topics they will cover in any guidance that may be forthcoming. Second, in this space, we are seeing new emergent approaches to managing risk and navigating compliance. It's important to understand that some of those approaches may not work for the size projects that schools do, right? Any compliance will necessarily involve some costs, and those costs may not scale down easily to the economics of the size projects that schools typically do, kind of less than 1 megawatt. We have heard of tax credit insurance being available in the marketplace. It's unclear whether that tax credit insurance product will cover the risks that are relevant to school districts, for example, this entity level test, and what cost that tax credit insurance will be offered at. Next, it's quite possible that a power purchase agreement versus direct ownership could change the risk profile for the district, given that entity level test and the somewhat unique issue that school districts face with their municipal debt. At some point, we're wondering, is the tax credit juice worth the squeeze? So between constraints on our supply chain of compliant material, extra compliance costs. At some point, we may be eroding our tax credit value. Again, we'd be jumping through all these hoops to secure a tax credit. But if in that process, all these costs have piled up, it may be that it's easier just to move without relying on a tax credit. And so it's important for us to do analysis on our solar pro formas to see whether there's still a strong value proposition for our school district without the tax credits. And that may be the case in many markets, especially those where energy costs are high. In all cases, we're encouraging school districts that are leading this work to think about what expectations they may need to reset with stakeholders about the likelihood of securing solar tax credits. Again, before the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, there was a very straightforward, well understood, and well-trodden path to secure tax credits for solar and energy storage projects. That's simply not the case today. And lastly, if you're a school district with a whole portfolio of projects that you're trying to accomplish, it may be that some locations may be easier for the utility to interconnect than others. So you may seek some information or feedback from your utility partner on where interconnection might be more likely to be achieved in a speedy fashion. Again, one of the tests, the entity level test, requires us to place into service. That's something that we need our utility partners to help us accomplish. Again, we hope you'll visit our hub, bookmark this page, and sign up for our newsletter so that if and when new guidance comes out, you will hear our translation of that for your context within a school district. Thanks so much for watching our video, and please reach out to info@undauntedk12.org with any questions or requests for assistance. We're happy to help.